case of Blumell family. Roger Blumell, born January 17, 1965, was raised in a big, close-knit family with strong values. Even in high school, he was driven and ambitious. He worked in transportation and later discovered his talent in sales, where he excelled. Friends say he could sell anything to anyone, thanks to his kind, cheerful personality. He was always happy and loved making others smile. Roger enjoyed a fulfilling life and a strong bond with his family, but something was missing: a life partner. That all changed one day when he met the right person. Although the details of their meeting are unclear, a close friend recalled that Roger was immediately smitten with a young woman and confidently declared his intention to marry her by the end of the evening. The woman who caught his attention was Melissa. Born on January 1, 1960, in Wichita, Melissa grew up in a loving family of 6 siblings, although she tragically lost a younger sister in infancy. Melissa was a kind, diligent, and helpful person who always put others before herself. She started her career as a bank cashier and worked her way up the ranks, earning promotions through her dedication, teamwork, and strong work ethic. Her career was marked by success, ultimately leading to her appointment as vice president of the bank. The first meeting of Roger and Melissa marked the start of a lifelong partnership between two kindred spirits who tied the knot in 1991. On the surface, the Blummells seemed to have it all. Melissa's rapid rise through the banking ranks, while Roger's charisma enabled him to successfully launch his own business venture. With a natural talent for bringing people together, Roger thrived on sharing good times with friends and spreading joy to those around him. In Melissa, he had found the ideal partner to share in his adventures. What's more, the couple's strong sense of social responsibility drove them to participate in and contribute to various charitable, sporting, and community-driven initiatives in their locality. The Blummell had an idyllic life, but it lacked one thing: a child to bring laughter and joy. After years of trying to conceive, they decided to adopt. A social worker introduced them to Kesha, who was putting her 2 sons, Tony and Chris, up for adoption. The Blummell wanted a closed adoption, but Kesha preferred open. In the end, the Blummell approached one, and Tony and Chris became part of their family, starting a new life. Tony was amazed by daily dinners. The kids quickly adapted, thriving in elementary school and beyond. They excelled in high school, making diverse friends and starring in sports like wrestling and football. Tony's wrestling prowess earned him second place in a division competition, promising a bright future for the family. Tony's family life took a drastic turn for the worse during his senior year of high school. Until then, he had been a model child, but suddenly he became rebellious and constantly clashed with his parents, resentful that they favored his younger brother Chris. He started drinking, breaking curfews, and even smoking marijuana, causing chaos at home and making it seem like all hope was lost for him to get back on track. Tony had always dreamed of joining the United States Air Force after graduating, but his new behavior ruined his chances. In 2013, he was arrested for a violent offense and then again for driving under the influence, which meant his records would prevent him from pursuing a career in military aviation. Tony's life spun out of control after these events. Lacking direction after high school, he shunned education and jobs, preferring to sleep in and get high on cannabis. Melissa lived in fear of his violent outbursts, and there was another secret the family didn't know. Since 2013, Kesha contacted her biological sons on social media. Tony was excited to reconnect, but Chris seemed unreceptive. Kesha was devastated after giving them up, relieved they were with a good family together. Reconnecting with Tony thrilled her, but she resented the family for allegedly turning Chris against her. Moreover, when Kesha learned about Tony's troubles with his adoptive parents, she saw an opportunity to reconnect with her son and swiftly extended an invitation for him to visit her. At the adoptive home, things worsened. Tony's rage boiled over and he punched a hole in the wall. This was the last straw. The family realized they and Chris were no longer safe. After failed attempts to address Tony's behavior, Roger and Melissa made the tough decision to ask him to leave. He started by wandering aimlessly, but he soon understood he needed to take action to support himself financially. He got jobs at fast food restaurants, and to make some extra money, he also sold cannabis. Despite having no fixed address and sleeping at different friends each night, he eventually fell in with a group of young people who were heavily into drug abuse. Among the midst of despairing events, a lifeline emerged for Tony when Kesha extended an invitation for him to move to California and live with her. Tony seized the opportunity with eagerness, and the reunion took place in September 2013 at Kesha's California residence. Accompanied by his high school best friend, Braden, who had dropped out in his junior year to pursue a life of drug dealing, he arrived filled with hope, seeking Kesha's support, who was well-versed in the drug trade, to establish a large-scale marijuana operation in the area, and even discussed entering the medical cannabis market. The reality was that they had arrived to live in a small apartment, which had only one room. It is not hard to imagine that the situation in the place began to be tense, particularly because Sean, Kesha's partner, had 2 jobs and was the only one bringing in money to cover the expenses for 5 people. Kesha only contributed a part of the social assistance she received for her daughter. Kesha, Tony, and Braden spent their days using drugs, and the woman's younger daughter was all the time under that bad influence. Sean reached a breaking point when she discovered Tony and Braden selling marijuana near her house. She told them to stop, citing the danger to her as the property owner. Then, she issued an ultimatum: get a job or leave the apartment. But instead of complying, the group banded together against her, eventually leaving for a nearby hotel for 2 weeks. However, without income, they couldn't afford the hotel bill. They didn't consider getting a decent job due to their financial struggles. Their initial plan was to head back to Kansas, possibly because Tony was familiar with the area from his drug dealings. After nearly a day of driving, they decided to stop in Arizona and spend the night at a hotel. It was during their stay that Tony shared an idea with his companions to kill his adoptive parents in order to inherit their wealth. Once they arrived in Wichita and settled into a hotel room they'd rented for a month, they focused on finalizing the details of this plan. Tony had devised a straightforward plan. He would kill Roger and Melissa, collect the insurance payout, sell off their assets, and use the proceeds to launch a more extensive drug operation. Tony was convinced that his original family would amass a fortune by growing and selling marijuana. He even pinpointed the ideal day to carry out the crime: Friday, November 15, 2013. This date suited him perfectly, since his brother Chris would be away, attending a wrestling event related to his practice. As a former wrestling star, Tony still maintained connections with some team members, which is how he learned about his brother's commitment that evening. Tony hatched a plan to invite Roger and Melissa to a meeting under the guise of discussing their past issues and making amends. While they were out, Braden would bring Kesha to the empty residence, where she would steal valuables. Tony knew the location of a stash of emergency cash his adoptive parents kept at home. The plan was to make it look like a botched robbery. When Roger and Melissa returned, Kesha would kill them. Initially, everyone thought the plan was solid, but Braden later got cold feet and refused to participate. He did agree to help by obtaining the necessary guns. As an alternative, he suggested his friend Andrew, a former high school acquaintance, who could drive Kesha to the residence and play a supporting role in the crime. Braden obtained 2 pistols from other criminals as promised. It's worth noting that there was never any plan to share the money with Andrew, who was hired to drive and provide backup for Kesha during the robbery in exchange for $11,000. Kesha would ultimately be the one carrying out the heist. In early November 2013, Kesha shared a photo on social media of herself with Tony, accompanied by a caption that read, "A bond that cannot be broken." Then, on Friday, November 15th, Tony's prediction came true. His adoptive parents agreed to meet with him, just as he had foreseen. The encounter took place peacefully. At the Blummel's house, a completely different scenario unfolded. Following Roger and Melissa's departure for the meeting, Kesha and Andrew snuck in, broke into the garage, and started searching through the house. They seized the chance to steal some small valuable items and the cash the couple kept on hand for emergencies. With the first part of their plan accomplished, Kesha and Andrew concealed themselves near the secluded residence, lying in wait for their victims to return. Tony called, saying his meeting ended and he was dropped off at the hotel. The wait was short. As the Blumble vehicle stopped, two attackers emerged. Kesha stood by Melissa's side. Andrew aimed at Roger. Melissa, still shocked, recognized the mother of the adopted children. She barely said, "Oh my God, Kesha," before a shot to the head made her collapse. Roger, frantic, tried to help his wife. Kesha approached, gun aimed at him, but it jammed. She tried again, Roger frozen in shock beside his wife's body. The gun finally fired and he collapsed next to her. After the fatal plan was executed, Kesha and Andrew hastily departed in the vehicle they had arrived in. The Blummel spouses remained at the scene until approximately 9:15 p.m., when Chris returned from his meeting to find the devastating scene. He quickly called 911, reporting that he had just arrived home to find his parents semi-conscious inside their van. He described Roger as coughing and Melissa as nodding her head up and down, both with visible gunshot wounds to their heads. The dispatcher instructed him to attempt resuscitation efforts while emergency services arrived shortly thereafter to take control of the situation. Miraculously, the Blummel were still alive, their lives clinging to a fragile thread, and were swiftly rushed to a hospital. Meanwhile, back at the hotel where they were staying, Kesha appeared to suffer a panic attack, declaring that she urgently needed to take an illicit substance, which she proceeded to do, joined by the other boys. Also, at that moment, Kesha handed over the used gun and a wallet containing stolen cash and micas to be discarded in a nearby stream. Andrew disposed of the evidence in a nearby park's pond. The next day, Tony used the proceeds to start dealing marijuana, earning his first $100 profit. Tragically, on the same day, Melissa lost her battle with illness and passed away at the age of 53. Tony visited his father in the hospital, unaware that he had been previously removed from the Blummel's will and insurance policies. As it turned out, the two heinous crimes had been committed for nothing. In the days that followed, it emerged that Andrew had not received payment and was even unaware that Kesha had stolen cash from the Blummel family's home. Eventually, fate caught up with them. During the initial inspection of the Blummel residence, the police observed that the garage door had been forced open, and upon entering the house, they found everything in disarray, with items scattered haphazardly. It was confirmed that money, jewelry, and other valuables had been stolen. The authorities considered the possibility that the attack on the couple had been a consequence of their arrival, while the thieves were still inside. However, since the fatal assault had occurred prior to the couple's entry into the home, this initial hypothesis was soon dismissed. In the van where Roger and Melissa were attacked, no significant fingerprints were found, although investigators did discover a book casing. Then the authorities shifted their focus to the victims' workplaces, suspecting that a disgruntled client might have sought revenge. However, this theory was also ruled out, so it was time to interview people close to the couple. Tony was first on the detective's list, as he had been the last person seen alive with the victims, but he vehemently denied any involvement, claiming he knew nothing about the incident. According to him, after finishing dinner, he had returned directly to the hotel where he was staying with his mother. The hotel staff corroborated this alibi. Next on the list was Chris, who had discovered the bodies, but he was quickly cleared after verifying that he had been at a dinner with the wrestling team at the time of the incident. However, the investigators discovered an anomaly in his behavior. He didn't appear overly distraught, instead seeming lost in thought. When police pursued this lead and questioned him about his parents' disappearance, Chris promptly replied that one person came to mind. He added that the only individual who might harbor a grudge against their parents and possibly be capable of such an act was his older brother, Tony. With this significant lead, the authorities caught a fortunate break in their hunt for the culprits. A man contacted the police, revealing that a young acquaintance of Tony's had approached him to buy a gun. The detectives homed in on this individual and upon digging into his background, uncovered a long history of drug-related offenses. Furthermore, they discovered he had accompanied Tony on a trip to California. The suspect was none other than Braden. Shortly after, Braden received a message from his family warning him that the sheriff's office investigators were seeking to question him about the Blummel case. The morning after, Braden voluntarily went to the police station. According to a press report, on his way to the station, Braden stopped at a pond to dispose of an item, allegedly the guns used in the crime, which had not been discarded as planned. As it happened, he was already under surveillance, and when the police searched the water, they found an unused pistol in the bag he had thrown away. Braden's interrogation lasted 3 days, during which he initially denied any involvement in the incident. However, he eventually cracked under the pressure from the authorities, confessing everything he knew, revealing that the idea for the attack originated with Tony. Tony Blummel, 18, and his biological mother, Kesha, 35, were arrested on November 19, 2013, at their hotel. Andrew, also 18, was taken into custody, and Braden, another 18-year-old, was arrested the following day. Initially, Kesha denied any involvement in the robbery and other crimes, while the 3 young men confessed. On November 25, 2013, the accused made their first court appearance via video conference, facing identical charges: first-degree murder, attempted first-degree murder, 2 counts of aggravated robbery, burglary, and theft. Bail was set at $500,000 for the 3 young men and $1 million for Kesha. On December 21st, Roger's heart stopped beating, and at just 48 years old, he was reunited with his beloved Melissa. Following Roger's death, the situation for the woman and the 3 young men took a dire turn as they faced the possibility of being charged with capital murder, which carried the risk of a death penalty sentence. On January 3, 2014, the 4 detainees were formally charged with 1 count of capital murder for allegedly killing multiple people in the same incident. Kesha also faced additional charges: 2 counts of aggravated robbery, 1 count of burglary, and 1 count of theft. The preliminary hearing took place on July 17th of that same year, by which time Braden had cut a deal with authorities, agreeing to become the prosecution's star witness in exchange for leniency in his sentence. In 2015, following a year of negotiations, Braden and 2 others implicated in the crime reached agreements with the prosecution. Under these agreements, the accused parties would not contest the charges brought against them, and in return they would relinquish their right to appeal their sentences. In exchange, the prosecution agreed to refrain from pursuing the death penalty and to dismiss certain charges. In a series of separate hearings commencing mid-2015, each of the accused parties formally confirmed their intention to plead guilty. Kesha got life in prison without parole for capital murder, plus 10 years for aggravated robbery. Her sentences will run back to back. In court, she expressed regret and respect for the victim's family, but denied involvement in the crime. She's still in a high-security prison today. Tony Blummel, known to all as Tony, received the same sentence as his mother. At the hearing, his Aunt Christina read a victim impact statement, thanking authorities for justice, and mentioning the love Roger and Melissa had shown Tony. Tony listened in silence, tears welling up. Christina told him he'd chosen his path, and one day he might understand the consequences of those choices. Tony's now in a correctional facility with a record of many infractions. A week later, Andrew was found guilty of first and second-degree murder, sentenced to life and 155 months. Last, Braden, who'd made a deal with prosecutors, was guilty of second-degree murder, sentenced to 242 years. His first release chance is May 28, 2035, but he's had 71 disciplinary reports for bad behavior. District Attorney satisfied with case outcome. Despite waiving appeal rights, Kesha tried and failed. Undisputed, Roger and Melissa Blummel's lives ended tragically. Kesha's excess-driven life led to tragedy, sparked by a descendant rejecting her. For his part, Tony repaid the couple's love and care with resentment, envy, and violence, opting for an unjustifiable path of substance abuse that ultimately led him to commit a double crime. As a consequence, Kesha's younger daughter was forced to grow up in a foster home. In contrast, Chris Blummel, with the support of his family, managed to overcome the ordeal and build a fulfilling life. Most of us can't think of anything bad happening to us as long as we stay close to our home. But on November 9, 1983, 11-year-old Laura Ann Weiser was found sexually assaulted and strangled to death after disappearing just a few feet away from her home in Fort Pierce, St. Lucie County, Florida. What malicious monster did Laura run into? Did she know her assailant, or was it a stranger? With its pristine beaches, diverse waterways, and sundry heritage sites. St. Lucy's is a postcard for how blissful Florida can be. Consisting of 688 square miles, St. Lucie County was home to beautiful communities where you could raise your family without a worry in the world. Yet, these opinions would be changed after a horrible crime occurred in this very place. Laura Ann Weiser was born on May 10, 1972, to her father, Jose Luis Navarro Weiser, and mother, Judy Marie Weiser. Other than Laura, the couple had 4 more children. Jose worked in the United States Armed Forces while Judy took care of their family. Laura was growing up in a nice home in St. Lucie County, Florida. Laura was described as a feisty and outspoken girl by those who knew her. In 1983, at 11, the bright and beautiful Laura was in 6th grade at Chester A. Moore Elementary School when everything changed. On Sunday, November 6, 1983, around 1:30 p.m., Laura was seen for the last time near Midway Road and Okeechobee Road in Fort Pierce, St. Lucie County, Florida. The night before, she had been sleeping over at a friend's house and was on her way home with a pile of clothes in her hands. She was within sight of her family's driveway when she was last spotted. Without anyone knowing how, the little girl vanished into thin air. The worry set in for Laura's family when she did not return home that afternoon as planned. Her parents called the friend Laura had been with, but they were informed that Laura had left hours ago. Panic-stricken, they quickly searched the area but couldn't find her. They then went to the St. Lucie County Sheriff's Office to report her missing. Sadly, at the time, authorities did not take reports of missing adolescents seriously until they had been missing for a longer period. In their words, adolescents who did not return home on time were often playing with their friends and had simply lost track of time. This miserable strategy from law enforcement obviously forced Laura's parents to helplessly wait for their daughter to show up at home, which she never did. A bolo sheet, however, was put out for Laura after the family insisted that she would never go anywhere on her own. Unfortunately, authorities never implemented a large-scale search in the initial phase of the investigation. Soon, a piece of information regarding Laura came to the light. A deputy from the St. Lucie County Sheriff's Office, James Howard Harrison, came forward saying that he saw the girl walking near a gas station close to her home. He had been on patrol in the same area on the day Laura went missing. That was the last time anyone saw Laura alive ever again. On November 9, 1983, 3 days after Laura went missing, her family received the news they feared the most. Her 90-pound lifeless body had been found in a drainage ditch of what was then called the Dunn Citrus Grove near Midway Road and Shin Road, approximately 600 yards from the intersection where she was last seen walking. Her body was taken to the medical examiner's office for an autopsy. According to the report, she had been murdered on the same day she went missing. She had been sexually assaulted and strangled to death in a disgusting act of sheer brutality. Laura's family was devastated at her demise, and they were upset at the half-hearted efforts of the local authorities. They could not wrap their heads around the fact that the police had never even bothered to start a large-scale search for Laura. At the same time, their small neighborhood was shocked at this brutal crime, but it was too late for any explanation, and people wanted nothing more than to find the murderer who chose this little girl as their prey. However, sadly for them, decades would pass before the mystery could be unraveled. There were not many clues to follow. A brief investigation ensued and detectives did a couple of interviews but could not gather any evidence to lead to a conviction or even apprehension. Soon the case went cold and remained so for 4 decades. Years later, in 2020, the St. Lucie County Sheriff's Office established a dedicated cold case squad, and Laura Ann's cold case was selected for the team to reinvestigate along with a few other cases. Detective Paul Taylor was in charge of the investigation. Although Taylor had no personal relation to the deceased girl, he took a special interest in this case. In a press conference, he later shared that he somehow did relate to the little girl's story after losing his only son to suicide. He even saw his son and Laura in a dream, which he considered an indication to keep digging through the mystery. Keeping a picture of Laura on his office desk, he promised himself to never give up on this little girl. As a part of the investigation, Taylor traced his way back in time, speaking to the witnesses as well as the original investigators. His investigation led him to one of their own who had never been on their radar, but was a part of the original investigation. The suspect was none other than the former St. Lucie County Sheriff's Office deputy, James Howard Harrison. Yes, you heard it right. He was the last person to see Laura alive. As he dug deeper into the evidence, Detective Taylor discovered many holes in the original investigation. Not only had Harrison last seen Laura, but he was also the one who reported the discovery of Laura's body. However, he was not the one who discovered it. Two men were working at Citrus Grove when they noticed a lifeless body of a little girl and reported it to the patrol officer in the area, Harrison. After Taylor talked to one of them, the man described the incident as deeply traumatizing. However, he could still remember the crime scene in great detail. Taylor was shocked to learn that his description did not match what was in the case file. The man further told him that Harrison asked them to immediately leave after they reported the discovery to him. This seemed strange, but what had been stranger was that no one else wanted to talk to them further after that. Was the first detective who talked to him after Harrison. Harrison spent 20 minutes with Laura's corpse before the other officers joined him. For the first time, there seemed to be a suspect in the murder of Laura and Heuser, and it was someone they could have never predicted. As the connection was made, Detective Taylor began to put the pieces of the puzzle together. The question had always bothered him as to why Harrison did not give the girl a lift. In any normal situation, even back then, a law enforcement officer who saw a little girl carrying a bundle of clothes would have assumed she was a runaway and would have stopped to at least talk to her or would have driven her home. Detective Taylor and his team theorized that Harrison moved the girl's body into the drainage ditch where she was found to get rid of potential evidence before the backup arrived. It was time for authorities to look at Deputy Harrison more closely for the first time. Supposedly, he had complaints brought forward from within the sheriff's office as co-workers felt he had been inappropriate with young women while conducting his duties as a deputy. Aside from his job in law enforcement, he also worked as a preacher in the region. Even in that job, he couldn't keep his dignity intact. Several accusations had come forward that Harrison had molested young girls at his job at Bethel Baptist Church in the city of Fort Pierce. Detective Taylor uncovered proof of Harrison tampering with evidence, moving things at the crime scene and hindering the investigation. Despite this checkered past, he was never charged. He was just kicked out of the church, and he himself resigned from the St. Lucie County Sheriff's Office in 1984, just 5 months after Laura's homicide. As nobody kept any tabs on him, and he was never formally charged, he just picked up his family and left, like nothing had ever happened. Over the years, he moved around a lot, and worked with 10 different law enforcement agencies in his entire career. Every time he started over, he took advantage of his position and maintained access to the potential victims. Sheriff Ken J. Mascara, who used to work with Harrison, said that he voiced concerns about Harrison's inappropriate interactions with young people. These complaints did not go anywhere at the time he made them, around 1979 or 1980. With all this new information, Detective Taylor went forward to gather more conclusive evidence. In 2021, analysts at a private DNA lab were able to recover the DNA from the sexual assault of the victim, which suggested that the suspect was male. But it was degraded too much by the time they were able to compare the DNA samples. Due to the extreme degradation, forensic analysts could not get a 100% match. Although no conclusive DNA evidence could be found, detectives decided that there was enough probable cause and circumstantial evidence to consider Harrison responsible for Laura's murder. We have established probable cause to determine that Harrison abducted, sexually assaulted, and murdered the juvenile victim, said Chief Deputy Brian Hester in a press conference in February of 2022. Unfortunately, Harrison would once again elude justice by dying from cancer in 2008. The ways our family was in disbelief at how the layers of this cold case had unfolded. It naturally was like a disbelief, a dream, Laura's older brother, Joe Wazer, stated. After all this time, you're telling me you're able to tell us who murdered our little sister? Sadly, Laura's parents would never see this day. Her mother passed away in 2007, and her father soon followed in 2009. Regardless of the outcome, Laura's remaining family was grateful to Detective Taylor for cracking this case, especially since nobody expected it. Several police departments around the state are now checking their own cold cases because they believe there were other victims. Ironically, where one police officer put all his efforts into helping people, the other abused his power to commit the crime. But at least in the end, the truth won. The case of Natalie Connolly. In the picturesque English countryside, a story of love and betrayal took a tragic turn, leaving a young mother's life in jeopardy. This is the story of Natalie Connolly, a tale of domestic abuse, resilience, and the pursuit of justice amidst unimaginable cruelty. Natalie, a devoted mother and partner, found herself trapped in a cycle of abuse that would culminate in a harrowing ordeal. Her story stands as a stark reminder of the hidden dangers lurking behind closed doors and the courage required to break free from the shackles of domestic violence. Natalie Connolly was a captivating beauty, both in appearance and charm. Her identical twin sister shared her lovely looks and deep connection. Natalie had a natural talent for bringing joy to others, easily sparking laughter and engaging in conversation with everyone she met. Despite the challenges of being a single parent, Natalie was wholly devoted to ensuring her daughter Madison had everything she needed. Natalie's unwavering dedication as a mother was evident in her constant presence and adoration for Madison, which fostered a strong admiration from her daughter. In a bustling bar, Natalie met John, a charming and debonair man who immediately caught her eye. Their connection was instantaneous, drawn together by an undeniable magnetic pull. Despite John being in his late 30s, his charm and wit quickly captivated Natalie's heart. Before long, they exchanged contact details, eager to explore their budding connection and spend more time together. Natalie found herself irresistibly attracted to John from the moment they met, though initially unaware of his occupation or wealth. As they grew closer, John revealed his status as a multimillionaire, a fact reinforced by his extravagant displays of affection. Lavish gifts flowed freely from his generous hand, and their evenings together were filled with luxurious dinners at high-end restaurants. His opulent mansion seemed to be plucked from a fairy tale, leaving Natalie spellbound by his refined and gentlemanly demeanor. Contrary to the charming facade John projected, he harbored a trove of hidden truths. It soon came to light that John's life was far more complex than he had let on. Amidst his engagement to a pregnant partner, with whom he anticipated their second child, John concealed the existence of 3 additional children. His involvement with Natalie was revealed to be an affair that persisted even as he navigated the dissolution of his prior relationship, ultimately choosing to redirect his focus towards her. Their romance unfolded like pages from a fairy tale from the onset. John and Madison formed an instant bond, while Natalie effortlessly won over John's children, showering her with lavish gifts and luxuries like spa days and a personal chauffeur. John seemed to fulfill every dream imaginable, yet amidst the opulence, reality set in. When Natalie moved in with John on his estate in Kinver, Staffordshire, England, their relationship was initially fueled by passion. However, living together revealed the true nature of their dynamic. True understanding emerges when you share every aspect of your daily lives. John's preferences leaned heavily towards the rougher side, reminiscent of scenes from the 50 Shades of Grey series, much to Natalie's discomfort. He derived pleasure from causing her pain during intimate moments, often leaving visible evidence of his aggression in the form of bruises and cuts. The extravagant dinners and romantic gestures began to lose their appeal when Natalie realized the steep emotional cost they came with. What once seemed like a fairy tale now bore the stark reality of a tumultuous relationship. Despite her reservations, Natalie reluctantly acquiesced to John's demands during their intense encounters, driven by a fear of abandonment similar to what he had done to his pregnant ex-fiancée. Despite struggling with this significant issue, she found contentment within the relationship and hesitated to leave, fearing a return to the monotony of her previous life. Seeking solace and guidance, she confided in her sister and mother, revealing the wounds and bruises that bore witness to John's violent tendencies during their intense sexual encounters. While acknowledging John's prowess in the bedroom, she also disclosed the distressing reality of his penchant for inflicting pain. Natalie found herself torn between the pleasure John provided and the harm he caused. She was caught in a dilemma, struggling to reconcile her desire to maintain the lavish lifestyle with John and her dissatisfaction with the intimate aspect of their relationship. Signs of strain became apparent as both Natalie and John sought connections outside their partnership. John engaged in conversations with other women, while Natalie also found herself messaging other men. When John uncovered Natalie's exchanges, his reaction was one of fury. While he didn't hesitate to pursue interactions with women himself, he vehemently opposed Natalie's involvement with other men, revealing a glaring double standard in their relationship dynamic. However, he remained silent, masking any signs of unease. On December 18, 2016, John proposed what seemed like a normal evening together. Drinks, watching a football game, and sharing supper. He ensured Natalie had an abundance of alcohol and even provided cocaine, though to a lesser extent than he consumed himself. This wasn't the first time he had orchestrated such a scenario, suggesting a pattern of behavior aimed at loosening her up before subjecting her to his despicable actions once they were alone at home. Natalie's heavy drinking on these occasions may have been an attempt to numb herself to the anticipated pain she knew she would endure once behind closed doors with John. For him, maintaining absolute control was paramount, ensuring he could fully indulge in his intentions towards Natalie without compromising his faculties. He meticulously regulated his alcohol intake, aiming to achieve a state of mild intoxication that wouldn't impede his actions. During their sexual encounters, following a seemingly delightful day out, culminating in a satisfying meal at one of their favorite establishments, John arranged for their driver to transport them home. However, beneath the facade of normalcy lurked John's sinister and malevolent intentions for that day. Natalie's intoxication was clearly evident, and the meal had not helped sober her up or absorb the alcohol. Disoriented, she stumbled out of the car upon their arrival home, inadvertently leaving her phone behind. The responsible course of action would have been to provide her with water and guide her to bed to sleep it off. However, John Broadhurst had far darker intentions in mind. Upon the driver's return with Natalie's phone, it remains unclear whether John accessed her messages. Subsequent toxicological testing and autopsy results painted a grim picture of Natalie's state. Despite her incapacitation, John was resolute in his desire for retribution, disregarding any potential consequences. Natalie became the unwilling recipient of his brutal advances, as he orchestrated her suffering to inflict maximum harm. He subjected her to a barrage of violence, including punches, kicks, stomps, and the act of throwing bleach at her face and genitals. To compound her agony, he used a bottle of carpet cleaner as a weapon, twisting and tearing at her. Once he had finished his cruel assault, he abandoned Natalie, naked and bloodied, at the base of the stairs. Her skirt pulled up around her waist, left to succumb to her injuries. She lay in a pool of her own blood as John callously retreated to bed. Hours later, upon awakening, he discovered Natalie lifeless, having succumbed to the numerous horrific wounds inflicted upon her, totaling a staggering 40. John's subsequent actions, including his unconvincing performance during the emergency call for an ambulance, revealed his warped psychological state. His detachment and lack of remorse were chillingly evident as he casually informed the operator of his futile attempts at CPR, referring to Natalie's lifeless state with callous indifference. Following Natalie's pronounced death, he was apprehended by authorities. In a feeble attempt to justify his heinous deeds, he offered the excuse of rough sex gone too far, claiming innocence and alleging that Natalie had actively consented to the extreme acts inflicted upon her. According to John's twisted narrative, Natalie purportedly requested the injuries, the violence, and even the insertion of the carpet cleaning bottle into her body, and she purportedly reassured him amidst the blood and pain. He claimed that she reassured him of her well-being, and expressed a desire for more of the same, painting himself as a mere pawn in her tragic demise. John attempted to deflect responsibility by asserting that Natalie willingly participated in rough sexual activities, claiming they had engaged in similar encounters numerous times without issue. When questioned about leaving her partially clothed at the foot of the stairs, he offered the feeble excuse that it was a routine occurrence, and that he had never provided blankets, as the house was consistently warm throughout the proceedings. John displayed a notable absence of remorse or contrition, instead placing blame squarely on Natalie's shoulders. Despite being found guilty of manslaughter, he received a lenient sentence of 3 years and 8 months, serving only 22 months before regaining his freedom. The Natalie Connolly case sparked widespread criticism, leading Fiona McKenzie to launch the We Can't Consent to This movement. McKenzie aims to ignite discussions on sexual assault and eliminate the rough sex defense, which trivializes violence in relationships. However, some still accept the court's decision, viewing it as an isolated incident rather than a systemic issue, risking victim blaming. This highlights the need for advocacy and education to challenge harmful narratives and support survivors. The rough sex murder defense was unequivocally prohibited with the passage of the Domestic Abuse Bill by Parliament on July 6, 2020, following the granting of royal assent on April 29, 2021. The Domestic Abuse Act of 2021 represents a crucial step forward in addressing and combating domestic violence, ensuring that perpetrators can no longer exploit such harmful defenses to justify their actions. Natalie's untimely death left a profound void in the lives of her family and friends, who continue to grapple with the pain of her loss. Their unwavering love and support for Natalie serve as a testament to her enduring spirit. In the aftermath, the community rallied together to raise awareness about domestic abuse and to support survivors in their journey towards healing and recovery. Their solidarity and compassion stand as a beacon of hope in the face of unspeakable tragedy. Though Natalie Connolly's life was tragically cut short, her memory lives on in the hearts of all who knew and loved her. May her story inspire us to stand against domestic abuse and to offer support to those in need. This case will take us to Spokane, a city that sits to the far east of Washington and holds the record for being the second largest city in the state. Spokane was once home to a native tribe, but has since evolved into a bustling, industrialized town. The city's beautiful landscapes are perfect for a wide range of outdoor activities, including downhill skating, mountain biking, and much more. Archie Rutherford was born in 1924 in Montana, but spent most of his life in Spokane. It was in Spokane that he met his wife Eleanor. In 1948, Archie and Eleanor became parents for the first time when they welcomed their son Stanley into the world. At the time, their joy knew no bounds. Archie had a passion for art, especially stage plays. This burning desire for theatrical performance drove him to join the Spokane Civic Theater, a non-profit theater that was established in 1947. His artistic brilliance paved the way for him and the establishment, and he quickly rose to the rank of a theater director. This position offered him the opportunity to direct several plays. In addition to being active with the Spokane Civic Center, Archie also worked as a night clerk at the Tradeswinds Motor Hotel in Spokane. From time to time, he also monitored a drive-in restaurant jointly owned by him and other family members. Archie's wife Eleanor was 6 years older than him. Like her husband, she was active in Spokane's art scene. She helped organize music and art festivals. Besides this, she was involved in several philanthropic works, and this made her quite popular in the city. In particular, she worked as a writer for a popular newspaper in the city, the Spokesman Review. Eleanor loved her job, and everyone she worked with had only good things to say about her. Archie was supportive of his wife, and together they lived a very peaceful and contented life in the city. By the early 1980s, Archie was in his late 50s, and Eleanor was a few years shy of clocking 65. It seemed to the couple that life would continue at such a pleasant pace for a long time. But they were wrong. None of them had any idea that a horrible life-changing incident would soon occur. On May 22, 1982, Eleanor took a trip to Seattle. She had been planning it for a while, and when the day arrived, Eleanor said goodbye to Archie. She had no idea this was the last time she would see him alive. On her second day in Seattle, she started to worry. Archie had not tried reaching out to her to ask how she was. By May 25th, she was done with her business in Seattle, and that afternoon, she had her flight back to Spokane. She had different thoughts while on the plane. Most of them were centered on Archie. She wondered why she had not heard from him for days. It was quite unusual, and she was deeply troubled by it. These thoughts troubled her till she landed in Spokane. Upon disembarking, She expected to see Archie waiting for her. They had planned that he would pick her up at the airport. But when she looked around, she realized he was nowhere to be found. At that point, she began to panic. She thought that perhaps he had encountered something that had delayed him. So, she decided to wait a while. The more she waited, the more anxious she became. When she could no longer bear the uncertainty, she made arrangements with a close friend to pick her up and take her home. As the car that took her home pulled up to her house, she noticed that her green 1979 Honda was not in the driveway where it was usually parked. The absence of the car meant that her husband was not at home, which puzzled her. She got out of her friend's car and headed towards the house. Something else caught her attention. On the front porch were piles of newspapers that someone had dumped there. In addition to this, a towel had also been carelessly thrown beside the newspapers. All of these things seemed odd to Eleanor. She could not make sense of what she was seeing. Much to her surprise, when she tried the door, she discovered it was unlocked. Did this mean that Archie was at home, or had he forgotten to lock the door before leaving the house? At that point, she did not know what to think. As she stepped into the silent house, she knew something was terribly wrong. The mess that had been outside the front door was nothing compared to what waited for her inside the house. The house was nothing short of chaotic, and things were all over the place. Steak knives from the kitchen drawer were scattered on the dining room table, and a colored television that was always in plain sight was missing. She took all of this disorder in at a glance and slowly made her way to the bedroom. As she opened the bedroom door, nothing prepared her for what she saw. Archie was lying motionless and naked on the bed. A television set was lying on the bed near his head, and its cord was wrapped around his neck. Archie's head and neck were bloodied, and blood covered the bed on which he lay. The wall of the room was also splattered with it. In addition to this, pieces of broken glass were visible near his head. There was no visible sign that he was breathing, and Eleanor hoped that somehow he would still be alive. But a part of her knew that there was no way he could have survived whatever had been done to him. She managed to calm herself enough to call the police and tell them what had happened. In a matter of minutes, wailing of sirens filled the air as detectives from the Spokane Police Department made their way to Eleanor and Archie's house. When they arrived at the scene, a distressed-looking Eleanor opened the door and led them to where her husband was. Even the detectives were shocked by the brutality of the scene. They were unable to immediately determine that Archie was dead. Without wasting much time, the detectives set to work. They began to collect evidence that would be of help to their investigation. While examining Archie's body, one of the detectives noticed cuts behind his left fingers and forearm. These injuries were believed to have been inflicted when he tried to protect himself from whoever killed him. More pieces of broken glass were under his back when his body was moved. But that was not all. A piece of cast iron was also found under his body, and another was on the bedroom floor. The frying pan from which these iron pieces had broken off was later discovered sitting on a stove in the kitchen. When the pan was examined, strands of hair and blood were found on it. Detectives believed Archie's killer had used it as a weapon, so they collected it as evidence. When the detectives checked the kitchen, they noticed a bloody knife in plain sight. There were also bottles of whiskey strewn across the floor of the kitchen. In the bathroom, they found cigarette butts and ash discarded inside the toilet. Soon after, detectives completed a thorough sweep of the house, and Archie's body was moved to the hospital for an autopsy. From their findings, detectives had cause to believe that robbery was likely the motive for the murder. They believed this because Eleanor revealed that several items were also missing from the house, in addition to her car. The missing items included some of her jewelry, house keys in Archie's wallet, in which he kept several of his credit cards. Detectives knew they needed to find Eleanor's car as soon as possible. They knew finding the vehicle was vital since it would likely lead them closer to the truth. Information about the car was soon released to the public. Archie's autopsy results came in the following day. They revealed that he had been stabbed multiple times in the head and neck. An object had also been used to violently hit him on the head, resulting in a fractured skull and internal bleeding. Detectives believed that the frying pan found in the kitchen was used to cause this damage. Brother Ford was likely knocked unconscious by a blow to the head before he was repeatedly stabbed to the left side of the head and neck. Spokane County Coroner Lois Shanks told the media at the time of the murder. The possibility of Archie being asleep when he was attacked was not ruled out. Friends of Archie and Eleanor were deeply saddened when they heard the tragic news. They visited Eleanor to mourn with her and also to comfort her. It was a difficult time for Eleanor, and she needed all the emotional support she could get. Simultaneously, the detectives were hard at work trying to solve the case. To help the detectives in their investigation, several people who had seen Archie hours before his death came forward to say what they knew. A friend of Archie, whose name was not disclosed, told detectives that he and Archie had had breakfast together on May 24th at a restaurant known as The Shack. The friend also revealed that he later saw Archie at work on the night of the same day. A police officer also reported that he had seen Archie that same night driving the missing Honda. As for the stolen car, it did not take long for it to surface. It was found the next day at a car dealership, which was about 4 miles from where the murder had occurred. Detectives immediately examined the vehicle and found a fingerprint that did not belong to Eleanor or Archie. This discovery excited the detectives who felt closer to solving the crime. The fingerprint was immediately submitted for analysis, but after several days of cross-checking it against the database, no match was found. This was something detectives had not expected, and they were left disappointed. They had the fingerprint of an unknown person who was most likely the killer, and they could not identify him. It was a frustrating time for them. After this, the pace of the investigation began to slow down, and it seemed as if Archie's killer had vanished into thin air. Days soon turned into weeks, and detectives made little to no progress with the investigation. However, when they least expected it, an incident occurred that allowed the investigation to pick up pace once again. Some of Archie's credit cards that had been reported missing suddenly turned up a few weeks after the murder in Kalispell, a city located northwest of Montana, about a 4-hour drive from Spokane. According to the police, one evening, 2 men had strolled casually into a radio station in Kalispell. They looked respectable, and no one seeing them would have thought that they were up to no good. The 2 men quickly made friends with workers at the radio station and were allowed to stay the night. This turned out to be a terrible decision because the 2 men had vanished the following day. Employees of the radio station did not give much thought to this until they discovered that some vital items in the radio station had also vanished along with the 2 men. It was then that they realized that the 2 men had been thieves. The incident was reported to the police, who took time to carry out an investigation. During the investigation, it was discovered that the 2 thieves had used Archie's credit card the night they arrived at the radio station. It was a significant discovery, and police knew that apprehending one or both thieves would lead them closer to solving Archie's murder case. However, they could not do much because they did not have the name of either of the 2 thieves. None of the employees at the radio station knew their names. Detectives did not have to wait too long for the name of one of the thieves to become known. This happened due to a random phone call Eleanor received from a stranger a few weeks later. During that phone call, the stranger identified himself as Bob Neville, and much to Eleanor's surprise, he had told her he had one of Archie's credit cards. Bob was soon found and interviewed by the police. During the interview, he revealed that a man called Jerry Provost had given the credit card to him. According to Bob, he had met Jerry in Spokane and they had struck a deal. The deal was that he would drive Jerry to the state of Idaho in exchange for some cash. However, for some reason, they had gone to Montana instead. They had also picked up a local disc jockey along the way. Bob told police that he dropped Jerry off at Polson, Montana, and that was the last he saw of him. With this information out in the open, detectives knew exactly who they were looking for. A manhunt for Jerry began. Unexpectedly, Jerry turned himself in to the police. When he was interviewed and asked about the credit cards, he confessed that he had gotten them from 2 black men. Nothing ever came out of this confession because the identity of the 2 men remained a mystery. Soon after this series of incidents, the investigation died down due to a lack of leads and the case went cold. It would remain like this for many years. On August 18, 1996, Eleanor sadly passed away at the age of 78 without ever finding out who murdered her husband. Years passed and most of Spokane's inhabitants soon forgot about Archie's murder. But the detectives of the city's police department never forgot. From time to time, the case was revisited, but no progress was made. Then, in October 2020, the case took a positive turn. A match was found for the fingerprint that had been lifted from Eleanor's Honda all those years ago. Detectives could not believe their eyes. The fingerprints belonged to a man by the name of Tracy Pruitt. The discovery was remarkable, but detectives knew they needed something more solid to be sure if Tracy was indeed the man they had been looking for. Due to this, they decided to take another look at the evidence that had been taken from the scene of the murder. The evidence they had were swabs of blood drops that had been obtained from the kitchen of the house the murder took place. There were also swabs that had been taken from Archie's body. All of these were submitted for forensic analysis. Soon enough, the results were out. There was a match from the DNA from the blood drops, and it was none other than Tracy. It was the final piece of the puzzle, and detectives knew they finally had their man. Tracy was not a stranger to the police. He had been involved in several criminal activities in the past and had even spent several years in prison for one of his crimes. In the same year that Archie was murdered, 2 women had accused Tracy of sexually assaulting them. He was arrested in Ohio for charges relating to the crime and received about 50 years of jail time after pleading guilty to rape, an aggravated assault. However, he spent only 27 years in prison and was then released. After he gained his freedom, he settled in California, where he lived an everyday life. But authorities kept a close watch on him due to his criminal past. On October 27, 2022, Tracy woke up not knowing he would be back behind bars before the end of the day. He was arrested in Los Angeles by Spokane police detectives, who also received help from the Los Angeles Police Department. After this, he was charged with first-degree murder and second-degree robbery. In addition to this, his bond was set at $1 million. At the moment, Tracy remains in custody in a jail in California, but he will soon be moved to Spokane to answer for his crimes. It took 40 years for Archie's murder to be solved, and sadly, in those years, many of his relatives and friends passed away, not knowing who killed him. The case of Cecile Bloch. 3.5 decades after the chilling and mysterious murder of 11-year-old French girl Cecile Bloch, the veil of secrecy was finally lifted by the revelation of DNA evidence. Unveiled alongside this newfound truth after the 35-year hunt was a horrifying connection. The same malevolent hand that took Cecile's innocence also stained France with the blood of other victims during the dark period. From 1986 to 1994, to make it worse, the chilling revelation was that the very person responsible for these heinous acts was someone who was supposed to be a guardian of the law, a gendarme and a policeman at the time of the murders. This is the tragic tale of Cecile Bloch. It's the fateful morning of May 5, 1986. The universe seemed to conspire against 24-year-old Luc Bloch, with the day kicking off on the wrong foot. At first, his alarm clock didn't go off, and to make matters worse, nobody in the Bloch household had the foresight to rouse him from his restless slumber. Luc, now in a mad dash to get to work, also had to make sure his young sister wasn't late to school. With a sense of urgency gnawing at his heels, he calls out to his little sister, telling her to hasten her preparations for school as he hurriedly leaves the apartment. In those days, it was common for children to go to school on their own. Every morning on weekdays, the parents Jean-Pierre and Suzanne Bloch would embark on their own journeys to work by 8 a.m. Luc too would depart the family apartment, leaving just before Cecile, who typically set off for her classes around 8:45 a.m. Lunchtime brought a cherished routine. Cecile would return home alone, savoring a comforting bowl of soup before serenading the household with her beloved violin. This gifted young girl was a maestro of melodies and really loved music. She harbored an affection for dogs and also excelled at school. At noon, her loving mother, Suzanne, would routinely dial the family apartment to make sure her daughter got home safely and had taken her lunch. But on that fateful day, an eerie silence met her call. The girl didn't pick up the phone, and this would lead to a horrific revelation that would create many questions of what had truly transpired on this fateful day. Let me take you back to the moment Luc Bloch embarked on his daily journey to work. As he stepped out of the apartment, the darkness of the landing greeted him yet again. There was no light for the third consecutive day. Frustration coursed through him as his fingers fumbled in the inky darkness to find the elevator button. The only functioning elevator glided to a halt on the 3rd floor, and inside stood a well-dressed young man. This man, possibly in his late 20s, possessed an athletic build with a pockmarked face. Luke, feeling a twinge of embarrassment, extended a cordial greeting, then disembarked on the 1st floor. The stranger wished him a strangely emphatic, "Good day." Something about this encounter struck Luke as peculiar. The man's politeness appeared excessive for a stranger. It was almost unnerving. In hindsight, Luke would recall the haunting final words uttered by this strange man. "Have a very, very good day." Little did he realize that in a matter of minutes, this very man would perpetrate the unspeakable to his young sister that would forever leave a scar in his heart. The clock struck 8:20 a.m. and within the building, the concierge perused a fresh newspaper while neighbors bustled about their morning routines. None among the building's residents could fathom that in just half an hour, young Cecile would meet her tragic fate. A fate that awaited her lifeless form in the shadowy depths of the building's basement, a staggering 3 floors beneath the building that was once her peaceful home. Suzanne, her heart sinking with each unanswered call, began to entertain a glimmer of hope that Cecile might be at her friend's house. She dialed the number, praying for a reassuring voice on the other end, but her fear intensified. As her friend confirmed the chilling truth, Cecile hadn't been to school, and she hadn't seen her that day either. By 1 p.m., panic had engulfed the parents, driving them to sprint back into the apartment, their frantic voices echoing as they desperately called out for their beloved daughter. Cecile was nowhere to be found. Suzanne's gaze fell upon her daughter's absent school bag, a sign that she had indeed departed. But to where? Meanwhile, Jean-Pierre initiated a series of agonizing calls to local hospitals. Their anxious pleas met with the same heartbreaking reply. No girl matching Cecile's description had been admitted. In the building's lobby, the parents beseeched the concierge to aid in the search for their missing child. With urgency fueling their every step, they raced to the police station, scouring the nearby streets and playgrounds as they went. Cecile was known for her unwavering attendance at school, and there were no significant issues at home to explain her absence. The question loomed large. Why had she left and where had she gone? The concierge, now joined by 2 concerned neighbors, embarked on a painstaking search of the building floor by floor, inching their way downwards. But the haunting truth remained. Cecile had vanished without a trace. All that remained was to descend into the foreboding cellar. The first room they entered was empty and devoid of any answers, while the second room stood locked. They then entered the third room, a chamber of forgotten clutter that obscured any immediate revelation. The room was a chaotic maze of forgotten possessions, a lot of junk from years past, so densely entangled that nothing could be seen at a single glance. In a breathless moment, a flashlight pierced the darkness, casting a feeble glow upon the basement's desolation. At first glance, it appeared vacant, but just as they were about to retreat, at the corner of his eye, one man caught a glimpse of something amiss in the periphery. A grimy, time-worn carpet that seemed to conceal something beneath it. He summoned the others, a glimmer of dread tugging at their hearts. Unfortunately, they found who they were looking for, but not the way they hoped they would find her. Outside the house, police cars and an ambulance had already arrived at the scene when Cecile's parents returned. They rushed past the gathered crowd in the basement. It was too late. The innocent life of young Cecile had already been taken. Her innocence brutally shattered. The wheels of justice began to turn, as a relentless investigation was launched into the heart-wrenching homicide. The grim investigation unveiled a chilling timeline. The malevolent intruder had infiltrated the block, lingering within its walls, and shared a sinister 40-minute encounter with Cecile, with witnesses testifying that he had departed the building at 9:20 a.m. They all echoed a hauntingly consistent description of the suspect. A dark-haired young man, aged between 25 and 30, his face marred by the cruel reminders of severe acne scars, the very same man who had exchanged strange pleasantries with Luke that morning. Drawing from the accounts of 6 witnesses and Luke's recollection, the police conjured a rough sketch of the malefactor, which found its way onto the pages of newspapers across France, while investigators managed to secure the assailant's biological material and ascertain his blood type. The nascent era of DNA forensics limited their progress. The evidence, a tantalizing puzzle piece, remained locked in a cold, waiting silence as the promise of breakthroughs in forensic science beckoned from the shadows. Yet the revelations remained scant, leaving a trail of unanswered questions and a community haunted by uncertainty. Just a month prior, the city had shuddered at the news of a similar predator haunting their midst. A man bearing an uncanny resemblance to the male factor now under investigation had assaulted an 8-year-old girl in an elevator. Yet miraculously she had survived to share her harrowing tale with investigators. This brave child, known only as Sarah, recounted how the man had cunningly posed as a police officer during the ordeal. What sent shock waves through the community were the eerie parallels emerging in 3 additional sexual assault cases. In these grim chapters, the assailant employing the same sinister ruse had targeted a 26-year-old woman and 2 young girls aged 11 and 14. Each victim had fallen prey to his apparent police identification card and the menacing glint of handcuffs, tools of restraint that he employed with chilling precision. The authorities were gripped by a sense of urgency as they grappled with the unsettling question. Was this a deceitful ploy to gain the trust of unsuspecting victims, or was he actually a police officer? Their suspicions were stoked not only by the violence inflicted upon his victims, but also by the chillingly calculated tactics he employed. A nagging intuition lingered among investigators, a conviction that this male factor was no ordinary criminal. Their gut told them he was either a sworn officer or a gendarme, a belief that would later be chillingly confirmed. However, capturing this predator was far from straightforward, as he continued to elude the clutches of justice with diabolical cunning. Despite widespread distribution of the sketch to the local population, it proved futile in unmasking the perpetrator. By the close of 1987, a sinister shadow had been cast over a number of crimes, all attributed to this man, based on his distinctive appearance and chilling demeanor. The investigation remained in an agonizing deadlock for years, swinging back and forth between closed and reopened status. In a cruel twist of fate, the latest DNA tests conducted in a bid for justice yielded inconclusive results, shrouding the identity of the perpetrator in a veil of impenetrable darkness. Tragically, the parents of the young victim never lived to witness the moment of reckoning. Suzanne met her untimely end in a devastating traffic accident in 1989, while Jean-Pierre departed the world in 2011. Their hearts bore the heavy burden of never knowing the face of the monster who had stolen their beloved Cecile away forever, leaving a haunting legacy of unresolved pain and injustice. The embers of the unresolved mystery began to rekindle, lighting the way for the determined cold case detectives. They uncovered a piece of evidence that sparked a glimmer of hope. The killer, known to drive a white car, had once been a member of the prestigious gendarmerie. His chilling history culminated in a final crime committed near a gendarmerie training center. The techniques he used displayed the unmistakable signs of police and military training. In 2021, the police made a bold move. They called in around 750 former police officers who had worked in the Paris area during the time of the crimes. Among them was the very man who had evaded justice for so long, who was called in for questioning on September 29, 2021. The investigators' goal was clear: to collect the DNA of these suspects, hoping fervently that the murderer might finally be identified among them. The plot took a harrowing twist on September 24th, when a summons landed in the hands of a man, compelling his appearance for questioning on September 29th. The demand extended further, requiring the surrender of a DNA sample. However, in a startling turn of events, the narrative pivoted on September 27th when the man's wife reported him missing. As the clock ticked relentlessly towards the fateful date, the puzzle was far from complete. 2 days later, on September 29th, 2021, in a quiet town in the south of France, tragedy struck in the form of a suicide. François Verrev, a 59-year-old man, chose to end his own life, leaving behind a farewell note that laid bare a haunting confession. Among its chilling lines, it read, "I admit being a great criminal who committed unforgivable acts until the end of the 1990s. In a heart-wrenching conclusion, DNA tests revealed the somber truth. The man authorities had hunted relentlessly for years. The pockmarked man, the elusive predator, was unmasked as François Verove. However, much about his background remained shrouded in mystery. Born on January 22, 1962 in France, he had grown up under the stern gaze of a strict father, a stepmother, and two stepsisters. His biological mother had succumbed to the ruthless grip of the flu. In his youth, he had harbored an unsettling fascination with horror movies, perhaps offering a glimpse into the darkness that would later consume him. In 1983, François embarked on a new chapter as he moved to Paris and joined the National Gendarmerie. By June 1985, he had married and took it upon himself to construct a family home from the ground up, a testament to his ambitions. In the eyes of a former friend, he wore the dual masks of kindness and decency, but his temper lurked just beneath the surface, a volatile element that could erupt without warning. Behind this facade, however, lay a chilling truth. He was completely the opposite of the positive traits he may have portrayed to others. For innocent young girls had suffered beneath his sinister hand, miraculously escaping his clutches, all except for young Cécile Bloch. François' malevolence didn't stop there. In 1987, he cold-bloodedly murdered two adults, 38-year-old Jill Politi and his devoted housekeeper Irmgard Muller. Armed with crucial DNA evidence, investigators embarked on a gripping journey, determined to unravel the secrets of a male factor whose dark deeds seemed endless. They fervently believed his sinister trail of crimes extended far beyond those already uncovered, driving them to delve deeper into unsolved cases, searching for hidden connections that could reveal the full extent of his reign of terror. Unfortunately, earthly justice may never hold him accountable for his atrocities, and retribution seems out of reach. The specter of his deeds looms large, leaving the question of inevitable justice to the realm beyond. As this harrowing tale unfolds, we are left with unanswered questions, wounds that may never fully heal, and the haunting presence of a man who committed unspeakable acts. François Verove may have evaded earthly justice, but his actions are forever etched in the indelible ink of infamy. Amidst the darkness, a glimmer of hope stands as a testament to the relentless tenacity of those who pursued answers. With advancements in DNA technology, the truth emerged from the depths of despair. In the afterlife, in the realm beyond, justice may yet find its elusive mark, allowing the innocent souls scarred by his malevolence to finally rest in peace. In the shadow of these chilling revelations, let us remember all those who suffered at the hands of this predator. Their memory lives on as a reminder that even in the darkest corners of our world, the relentless pursuit of justice can be a beacon of hope. As we close this chapter of human frailty and malevolence, let us remember Cécile, not for the darkness that took her, but for the vibrant spirit she once embodied. For every life taken too soon, there remains a legacy that defies the shadows, a testament to the unwavering hope that someday justice will prevail. May the souls of Cécile and all the other victims rest in eternal peace. On July 23, 1980, a young farmer from a small peaceful town in Washington came across the remains of what looked to be a man. The autopsy later revealed it to be a man in his late 50s. The remains had been there for about a month. The forensic investigation, which was still in its infancy, revealed very little about the man. He was later given the moniker John Doe, even though he was gone for more than 4 decades. Why did no one file a missing report? Who was this man? How did the family react after 42 years of disappearance? Watch till the end to find out. Our story today takes us to the city of Arlington. It is one of the most beautiful river valleys in western Washington. Snohomish County has a rich and vibrant history of logging and agriculture. After World War I, agriculture, dairy farming, and shingle mills were some of the main sources of income for the residents. After the Second World War, Arlington remained a typical small American town with logging and agriculture as the main source of livelihood for many. Life was normal by those standards, but it wasn't until the 1960s that the population grew by more than 400%. Our case today takes us to this place at a time 40 years ago. when a teenage boy discovers unidentified remains of a man in the most famous river in all of western Washington, the Stillaguamish River. It was July 23, 1980. Spencer Fuentes was a young farmer and a devoted Protestant who went to the Lutheran Church in Sylvania. Spencer had his trousers carelessly rolled up above his knees with his ankles submerged in water as he threw streamers and dry flies to bait a fish. In Arlington, fly fishing was quite the trend in those days. Spencer was at the Stillaguamish River on his blueberry and hazelnut farm, working on his skill as an angler. He was alone at the time when he caught a whiff of a stench. It was invasive but tolerable, and so he began looking around for the source. It must have been a dead animal, was what he thought to himself as he looked around the premises. And that is when he found something he would have never expected. He saw something floating between the logs at the riverbank. And when he walked closer to look, he saw a man's arm with his fingers dangling on the log, with the rest of his body submerged under the river. He didn't dare go any closer and hurried back to the nearest police station. The sheriff's deputy responded with skepticism as no one had reported someone missing. But he went with Spencer to speculate anyway. The deputy later confirmed it to be a body. Soon the backup arrived and they took the remains into custody. An investigation ensued and they began checking the perimeter. The deputies could only concur that it could have been anything. It could have been a suicide or maybe another fly fisherman enthusiast who met with an accident while swinging his fishing line. He was wearing a dark suit jacket and cotton pants, and all they had was 3 letters on the belt: G-R and N to work with. These could be the initials of his name, but could just as well be anything else. They determined the age of the deceased to be anywhere between 37 to 70. But that was too wide a range to work with. The river wasn't deep, and it certainly wasn't deep enough to drown. But it could still be a possibility. And the condition that the body was in made it certain that the person must have been dead for months. When a body is submerged in water for long periods of time, anything can happen. There could be predatory animals looking for food, and there could be bloating in the remains for the bacterial activities, putrefaction, and soft tissue discoloration. All of these factors make it hard for the investigators to identify the deceased and proceed further with the investigation. July is the warmest and driest month in Washington, and the temperature of the water could turn the skin into soapy fatty acids called grave wax. The only probable explanation they could infer was drowning, but it was later ruled out when the autopsy reports came in. Dr. Clayton Haberman, who performed the autopsy, cited the cause to be apparently natural. The autopsy reports determined that the decedent had no signs of trauma or any signs of drowning. While they did find water in the lungs of the deceased, that was just because the person was in the water for a long time. But the reports had a section that could easily solve the mystery. The person had severe coronary artery disease, and that was much more likely the cause of his death. It is a fairly common disease among the elderly and those with diabetes, high blood pressure, and alcohol issues. A condition when the arteries that carry blood to the heart get hard and narrow. The case was solved and it was not a murder. But who was this man? According to Dr. Haberman's report, the deceased was a male who stood 5 feet 7 inches, tall and weighed about 150 pounds. They were not able to pinpoint an age, but he had gray hair, indicating he was on the older side. The deputies could not just take a picture and put it in the newspapers as the face was barely recognizable. With very little to work with, they sought help from a dentist. Dr. Keith Leonard sifted through his dental records, comparing the deceased's teeth with the files of known missing persons. As expected, all efforts went in vain. With no hope, the Snohomish County Coroner's Office tagged the decedent as John Doe No. 2 and put the name in a file with a case number, 80-7-526. About 3 weeks after the discovery of the decedent, on the 15th of August 1980, John Doe No. 2 was buried at the Arlington Cemetery by the Weller Funeral Home, but the deputies never stopped looking. It was a common practice to bury John Doe's or unidentified remains back then, but these days the unidentified skeletal remains which are discovered are kept at the Snohomish County Medical Examiner's office until they find the family. The skeletal remains were buried under a plot. The grave was marked John Doe 1980, which just seemed like a dignified, unmarked grave. The deputies were tirelessly working on the missing cases, comparing these John Does to many records of people who had vanished without a trace. It was 2008 when a cold case detective, Jim Scharf, from the Snohomish County Sheriff's Office teamed up with a retired Superior Court judge of Snohomish County, Ken Calsert. When they finally had hope, they began reopening unsolved homicide cases and comparing them with all the John and Jane Does in Snohomish County. By then, DNA technology had evolved enough for them to be able to solve these cases, or at least partially identify them. But these unidentified people were already resting in their graves, and during the initial investigations, no DNA samples were taken. They wrote a permission letter to exhume the remains from the Arlington Municipal Cemetery, but the entire process of obtaining the exclamation permits and conducting the DNA testing could take years. In late 2017, while the world prepared for Christmas, the deputies and the representatives from the Snohomish County Sheriff's Office and the Medical Examiner's Office were at the Arlington Municipal Cemetery, exhuming the remains from the grave. Some parts of the remains were taken to the Medical Examiner's Office for DNA extraction. They gathered these DNA from many. They had a lot of John Doe genome to work with, and so the Medical Examiner's Office further nicknamed it I-5 Steely Doe. The process took time, and about 6 months later, in May 2018, this newfound DNA information was uploaded to National Missing and Unidentified Person Systems, or NamUs, a federal database that is funded by the National Institute of Justice. The database keeps a track of all the information of anyone missing, unidentified, and unclaimed from all around the nation. The database has dental records, fingerprints, and basically anything that can help them identify individuals. The database was still growing, and so after they had uploaded the details, all they could do was wait. NCIC, or National Crime Information Center database, is the FBI's database, which is a computerized index that keeps a track of crimes and incidents, including missing person cases. Forensic odontologist Dr. Gary Bell took a dental radiograph of the decedent, dubbed John Doe No. 2, charted the teeth, and then uploaded them to NCIC. But that was again to no avail. But with the new advancements in technology, they had a lot of other ways to make it work. A month later, a forensic artist took all of the existing information on John Doe No. 2 and drew a facial reconstruction entirely based on facial morphology. The forensic artist, Natalie Murray, prepared a drawing that wasn't a photographic image, but an interpretation of the person based on the information provided. And these drawings were meant to resemble the missing person and were made in hopes that someone might recognize the man. But that was to no avail. It had been 38 years since the body was discovered, and they must have thought it would take a miracle for someone to remember someone who they knew 38 years ago. Dr. Kathy Taylor stepped up and investigated further. They had almost everything on the man. With a forensic facial reconstruction by Natalie Murray and Dr. Kathy Taylor's estimation of the man based on the remains, this is what they had. The man could be of Native American, Caucasian, or Hispanic origin. A 45 to 60-year-old man standing 5'9" with coronary artery disease. Although there was no perimortem trauma, the remains did indicate the man had damaged his ribs at some point of time in his life. There was evidence of well-healed rib and spinal compression fractures. The investigation had already taken too long. The sheriffs retired, but the search didn't. The researchers took a shot at mailing a section of a thigh bone, the femur, to the University of North Texas Health Sciences Center for DNA extraction and to be uploaded to CODIS. CODIS, or Combined DNA Index System, is where all of the DNA information is stored and compared. CODIS aims to be the biggest DNA database. When the university obtained a full ntDNA and STR profile of the deceased, they uploaded them to CODIS. But that did not help either. It was normal for a DNA profile to not yield any matches, as the database was fairly new. In the following years, Snohomish County tried a number of methods, including going back to the files, matching and ruling out these new components like STR testing, dental records, and others. By 2021, genetic genealogy had gathered quite a name for itself. The method had provided positive results over the past 2 years, and they were able to identify several John Does. And this time, a fraction of I-5 Steely Doe's thigh bone was sent for DNA extraction. They asked Othram Incorporated to prepare DNA profiles suitable for the forensic genetic genealogy database. The 41-year-old femur was in the Ulthram labs for about 5 months until they successfully obtained a sufficient DNA extraction after multiple rounds of extracts and enrichments. Finally, they managed to build a DNA profile that could be uploaded to the genealogical database. The Snohomish County Medical Examiner's Office uploaded the DNA profile received from Ulthram Incorporated to GEDmatch. It is a global database of DNA data, a free utility DNA site built for genetic genealogy research. Finally, there was a match, but it was a distant cousin. In a 5th to 7th range, there was a high chance that they might not even know the person. But this lead was enough to spark a new interest in the case. Building a usable family tree usually requires a second cousin match or something closer establish a proper connection. A Ken forensics investigator, Deb Stone, began working on the case, and in May 2022, the Steely Doe profile was uploaded to a database called FamilyTreeEdna.com. This too yielded very low results, but what mattered was that there were new matches. These matches piled up together, and a single family tree could perhaps finally solve the mystery of John Doe number 2. Deb Stone began putting 2 and 2 together, looking for family members near the areas where the body was first discovered. 42 years is a long time, and it was very unlikely for a distant cousin to remember someone from that many years ago. The woman she was going to meet had descendants in the state of Washington. This was a distant cousin, but a cousin nonetheless. When Deb Stone interviewed her, she recalled a relative who once told her about an uncle who went missing from Arlington. Back in the 1980s, the investigators finally had a name, Othniel Philip Ames. But that was a huge if. The Othniel they described was told to be 82 years old when he went missing, but the DNA profile and other reports estimated that the remains were of a person who must be in his 40s to 60s. For a DNA reference, they took DNA samples from a granddaughter, which ultimately was the nail in the coffin. John Doe number 2 and I-5 Steely Doe were indeed Othniel Philip Ames. Dr. Matt Lacey, the chief medical examiner, officially identified John Doe number 2 as Othniel Philip Ames in September. Othniel told his family that he was going on a trip before he left, a month before his remains were found. He said he was going to take a tour of the country and meet his friends and relatives starting from the West Coast. It was much more likely to be a suicide case where an old man is gradually giving away everything he possesses. Before his disappearance, Othniel gave a Bible about the size of a passport to his grandniece, Kay Taylor. She says that this was on Thursday, the 8th of January 1980, as it was written on the dedication page. He gifted his old car, which was only worth a couple of $100s, to Diana Lidge and her husband. Elledge recalls Othniel whispering to them that he had hidden $20 somewhere in the car as an emergency fund. Othniel also gave them a vintage shotgun. While she did not know why he gave those things to her, her sister thinks it is because he liked the married couple as they had invited him to their wedding. Elledge said something very sad about Othniel. She said that he knew the end was near and he was very ill. He just went up into the woods to die there. Othniel also gave his house away to a nursing student who might have been his neighbor at the time. The irony here is how in a press conference Margaret Ames talks about Spencer and how they met. The young teen who discovered the remains of Othniel Philip Ames at the time, Spencer Fuentes, actually met Margaret Ames, the daughter-in-law of Othniel Philip Ames, when she moved back to Savannah with her husband in the early 1990s, 10 years after the incident. She met Spencer Fuentes through the Lutheran Church, but they never talked about Rivers or remains. Doug Ames, Othniel's grandson, took the day off work to meet Spencer Fuentes and his family. Othniel Philip Ames was born on the 23rd of August, 1898 in Elwood, Iowa. He saw some of the worst days in his life as he was only 20 years old when World War I broke out. He lived in a small town called Bone Steel in South Dakota, and the entire town only had 600 people at the time. Othniel had to leave his hometown for better job opportunities and quality of life like many other young people living in Bone Steel. Today, only 249 people are living there. In 1929, he went on to marry Lydia Newth, a 25-year-old woman, in a town with only a couple dozen residents at the time. A place called Cottonwood is located in South Dakota, and even today only 11 people live in the entire town. Life was hard, and the approaching stock market crash meant it was going to get harder. The shadows of war had engulfed the nation, and it was chaos everywhere. Nathaniel was there trying to save his family, trying to survive. About 7 years later, the Ames family decided to move. The entire family moved across the country. A man, a pregnant wife, and their kids with a trailer latched onto their car. Nathaniel and his sons worked hard and built a farm on 22 acres of land. The family kept 7 dairy cows and Nathaniel became a milkman. Lydia would cook on a wood stove and Nathaniel would milk the cows and farm. Those days life wasn't as easy as it is now. And the war made it even harder. Apart from farming, Nathaniel also had a lathe in his basement where he would carve salt and pepper shakers, among other things which he would just give away. Nathaniel also began working at a shingle mill, and when he had time to spare, he'd make dandelion wine. He wasn't the type to sit around. He always kept himself busy. Life taught him the hard way, and he grew up to be a stern man. But life wasn't easy, and it was as though he was always looking for reasons to be happy. Always looking for a way to distract himself. Tragedy struck when one of their daughters died in a car crash while she was on her way to her 10th high school reunion. Even though they never had an official divorce, the married couple got separated sometime in the 1960s. The family was in fragments as both the sons joined the military when they were teenagers. One of them served in the Air Force and married a young Norwegian woman in Savannah. After the separation, the Ames family sold their farm, but most importantly their home, which they built after facing so much hardship. Lydia moved to Everett and Nathaniel went on to live in a small cabin in the woods, all alone somewhere near Arlington, along the Ebbe Mountain Road. He had a very minimal lifestyle and all he had with him was his pet dog, who knew how to close doors by backing into them. I guess it's safe to say he was an avid outdoorsman. There he grew dahlias and kept to himself. He was a loner and all he wanted was peace. The log cabin was comfortable enough for one person even though he did not have an indoor bathroom, but he had hollowed out a huge stump to compensate for it. He spent the last of his days at the log cabin along with his dog. The last time Diana Lidge saw him, he was ill. It was evident during the autopsy that he had severe coronary artery disease. In his last moments, he knew it was the end and so, he chose to leave silently. It is ironic how Margaret Ames is around the same age now as Nathaniel Ames was when they finally found him. This case shows how modern ways of life have created a huge gap between parents and children. Nathaniel chose to stay alone and away from everyone even during the times when he needed someone to stay beside the most as he did not want to be a burden. Drew Katrina Shodan was born September 26, 1981, in Minneapolis, Minnesota. She was the younger of 2 children to her parents, Alan and Linda. When Drew was 3 years old, her parents divorced but kept their friendship. From age 10, she and her brother Sven were raised by Linda and her second husband, Sid Walker, a travel agent in a comfortable home on Whitefish Lake, renowned as one of Minnesota's most scenic vacation spots. Drew blossomed in high school, becoming an honor student, joining the golf team, and getting elected homecoming queen in 1999. But her real passion was for art. Her room at home was filled with her sketches of rock stars, models, and her friends. After graduating from high school, she went to the University of North Dakota Grand Forks, a city of about 50,000 people. Friends described Drew as a person in love with life and ready to lend a helping hand to everyone. She often traveled around the country, but her dream was to visit Australia, and Drew was going to go there in the spring of 2004. In preparation for the event to save up more money, Drew worked 2 jobs in her spare time, a sales associate at Victoria's Secret and a waitress at a nightclub in Grand Forks. On Saturday, November 22, 2003, Drew's shift at the Victoria's Secret store, located in Columbia Mall, ended at 4 p.m. Later that day, she was supposed to work at a nightclub. Before leaving the mall, Drew decided to go shopping and bought a purse from a certain store. She called her boyfriend, Chris Lane, as she made her way to her car in the parking lot. Suddenly, after Drew said, Okay, the call was disconnected. But Chris didn't give it much thought. There was nothing important they were discussing, and so he didn't call back. About 3 hours later, Chris' phone rang again, and it was Drew calling. When he answered it, all he heard was a noise, like the sound of the wind and the sound of buttons being pressed on the phone. 3 weeks later, in an interview on a television station, Chris recounted the thoughts that flashed through his mind when his conversation with Drew was interrupted. "I did not know the sense of urgency of this phone call at the time," he said. "I never in a million years dreamt that this was happening. There was no sense of urgency. More just a cell phone call being cut off for any number of reasons. Honestly, I had no idea that this terrible thing was happening." Drew was living in a college dorm where she shared a room with a friend named Meg Murphy. About the same time Chris received a strange phone call, Meg received a call from the nightclub where they were trying to find out why Drew hadn't come to work and wasn't answering the phone. She was a responsible employee and always came to work early, so her absence immediately caused everyone's concern. However, Meg didn't know where Drew might be and was surprised that she hadn't shown up for work. Trying to find out where her friend Meg had disappeared, she first called mutual acquaintances and then called the local hospital where she was told that Drew had not been admitted there. Around 9 p.m., unable to find out anything, Meg called the police, knowing that Drew worked at Columbia Mall. A police officer was dispatched there. At this point, the mall was already closed. Driving around the parking lot, the officer saw Drew's car. Upon examining it, he found that the car was unlocked. There were no signs of a struggle or any other crime. A black nylon sheath from a folding knife was found on the ground near the car. It wasn't clear yet whether it had anything to do with Drew's disappearance, but such a find was not encouraging. On the seat in the car were papers, a wallet, and a new purse purchased that day, suggesting that even if Drew had faced some dirty deed, it certainly hadn't been a robbery. Neither friends, boyfriend, nor parents knew where Drew might be, so investigators began to lean toward the theory that they were dealing with a kidnapping. First of all, detectives checked out Chris Lang. He was almost immediately ruled out as a suspect because he was in Minnesota, 300 miles from Grand Forks. From Chris, the police learned about the 2 phone calls Drew had made, that one had been abruptly interrupted, and that during the second, made a few hours later, wind noises and the sound of button pressing could be heard. The next day, when the mall where Drew worked opened, the detectives arrived there to review the security camera footage. As it turned out, there were no security cameras in the parking lot where the missing girl's car was parked. But fortunately, there were quite a few security cameras inside the mall. Going through the footage, detectives found a moment when Drew went into one of the local stores after work, where she bought herself a purse. She was calm and in no hurry to go anywhere. She was wearing a pink sweater and was holding a jacket. At 4:55 p.m., Drew paid for her purchase at the register, then put on her jacket and left the store. On her way out, she called Chris. The call was made at exactly 5 p.m., and as we now know, at 5:04 p.m., the conversation between Drew and Chris was abruptly interrupted after she said, "Okay. Knowing that the call was interrupted after 4 minutes, one of the detectives decided to conduct an experiment. Setting the timer for 4 minutes, he began walking slowly from the store where Drew had bought her purse to the parking lot where her car was parked. When the alarm sounded indicating that 4 minutes had passed, the detective was in the parking lot near where the car had been found. This indicated that something had happened while Drew was at her car. However, as mentioned earlier, there were no cameras overlooking the parking lot, and that made it difficult to investigate. Drew's disappearance attracted media attention, and as a result, a huge number of people learned about what had happened to her, many of whom decided not to remain indifferent to someone else's misfortune. In addition to police officers, over 1,000 volunteers participated in the search for Drew. FBI officers also joined the investigation. The last call that was made from Drew's phone was traced to the small town of Fisher in neighboring Minnesota, which is only a 30-minute drive from the mall where she worked. As you can see on the map, the area around these 2 towns is occupied by fields. Police used helicopters, all-terrain vehicles, horses, and dogs to explore these fields. The landowners were asked to check their properties themselves, but unfortunately this was inconclusive, and at first no leads could be found. The search radius increased with each new day, and 4 days later an ominous discovery was made. A boot was found under a bridge in the town of Crookston. A roommate noted that on the day of her disappearance, Drew had left the house wearing those boots. Later, The fact that the shoe belonged to the missing girl was confirmed by forensics. Crookston is a small town of less than 10,000 people. It is located about 30 miles from Grand Forks, where Drew disappeared from. Further searches in the Crookston area yielded no results, as there was nothing of investigative interest to be found. A reward of $20,000 was initially offered for information that would help to determine Drew's whereabouts, and then the reward was increased to $140,000. At this point, the only clue that could lead to Drew was the surveillance footage at Columbia Mall. The detectives again sat down to watch hundreds of hours of footage from various cameras, but this time they decided to focus their attention not on Drew. They speculated that whoever abducted her may have been following her and may also have been on the videos. The investigators spent hours at the monitors before they saw the person who had caught their attention. They noticed a man walking aimlessly around the mall. He was not buying anything and seemed to be looking more at the people around him than at the merchandise being sold. At 3:41 p.m., he sat down on a bench near the mall exit and continued to watch people casually walk past him. After about 10 minutes, he got up from the bench and, wearing black gloves on his hands, walked out into the lobby, where there was a camera hanging overhead, into which he looked. This shot was taken 72 minutes before Drew's conversation with her boyfriend was interrupted, and she disappeared. After watching the man get up from his seat and walk away, investigators noticed that he only did so when a blonde woman walked past him, carrying a grocery cart heading in the direction of the parking lot. Detectives did not consider this a coincidence. Rather, in their opinion, the man seemed to have chosen a suitable victim and followed her. The identity of this woman was unknown, but police were aware that only one person, Drew Shoden, had disappeared from the mall parking lot that day. Given the slight resemblance between Drew and the woman this suspicious man was following, it has been suggested that he had a particular image of the victim. If the kidnapper really was this man, and if for some reason he had failed to kidnap this woman, his next target might have been Drew. She had left them all around 5 p.m., a time when it was already dark, which might have played into the hands of the perpetrator. At this point in the investigation, there were 3 cities in the case: Grand Forks, where Drew was kidnapped; Fisher, where her phone was last active; and Crookston, where the shoe was found. With this data in mind, the FBI began checking the files of all registered sex offenders from these cities and their environs. Comparing the photos from the files with the image of the suspicious man from the mall, there was only one man who matched all the parameters, and that was Alfonso Rodriguez Jr., who had an extensive criminal history of repeated crimes against women. The 50-year-old man had spent the last 23 years behind bars. Rodriguez was the second oldest of 5 children born in Laredo, Texas in February 1953. To migrant workers Dolores and Alfonso Rodriguez Sr., Alfonso Rodriguez Jr. claimed to have had an unhappy childhood, describing his home life as unpleasant because his parents were highly critical of him and unreasonable in their demands. His family moved from state to state for 15 years until they finally settled in Crookston in 1963. Rodriguez became increasingly isolated while growing up, which was further compounded by language barriers. His preferred language was Spanish, and he struggled with English, which made school especially challenging. He eventually dropped out of school during the 9th grade and began working as a laborer at the American Crystal Sugar Company plant in Crookston. Rodriguez claimed that he was molested by older women during his youth, which he said was the source of his hostile feelings against women. In October 1974, at the age of 21, he asked a woman for a ride home, but instead directed her to the driveway in Crookston, where he grabbed her by the throat and tried to force her to please him. The next month, he approached another woman who was sitting in a truck outside of a Crookston movie theater. He threatened her with a knife and ordered her to a secluded spot in the countryside, where he forced her to have intercourse with him. Then in 1979, he tried to kidnap a 69-year-old high school English teacher while she was out walking one night in Crookston. The woman fought back as Rodriguez tried to force her into his car. In a fit of anger, he stabbed her with a knife in her elbow and abdomen, yet she managed to break free and run to safety. The woman, who was artistically talented, was able to draw a composite sketch of Rodriguez that closely resembled him and led to his capture. He was convicted of attempted kidnapping and aggravated assault and sent to prison for 23 years until his release in May 2003. He had been released from prison 6 months before Drew disappeared and was registered as a sex offender of the highest third degree, which meant that his risk of reoffending was as high as possible. Before his release from prison, Rodriguez's family voiced their concerns to Minnesota Department of Corrections officials. Even his family feared that he was going back to his old ways. But despite their fears, Alfonso was released because he had served his entire sentence. After his release, Rodriguez lived with his mother in Crookston, just a couple of miles from the bridge where, it should be recalled, Drew's shoe had been found, which was another factor not in his favor. The detectives decided to talk to Alfonso Rodriguez, and of course, he denied any involvement in Drew's disappearance. The man confirmed that he had been at the Columbia Mall the day she disappeared, saying that he had gone to the movie theater and watched the movie Once Upon a Time in Mexico. What he didn't consider was that none of the movie theaters in Grand Forks were showing the movie that day. Police searched Rodriguez's car and realized with regret that Drew was probably no longer alive. It looks at this time like there's no chance we're going to find Drew alive, Grand Forks County Sheriff Dan Hill told reporters. I believe that it is more of a recovery than a rescue mission at this point in time. In Rodriguez's car, dark red dried stains were found in several places in the interior, which forensics later determined were drops of Drew's blood. The affidavit says blood was found on the passenger side rear window and in the back seat, as well as 2 other areas in the passenger compartment. The blood did come back. It was a DNA match with Drew from the DNA taken from Drew's toothbrush, the sheriff said. A folding knife was found in the trunk, which matched the sheath found in the parking lot next to Drew's car. A receipt was also found indicating that Rodriguez had purchased this knife, complete with its sheath, from a hardware store located several hundred yards from the parking lot where Drew disappeared. Although Drew was not found alive or dead, investigators gathered enough evidence to charge Rodriguez. 8 days after she disappeared, on December 1, 2003, the man was arrested. Rodriguez, who was imprisoned in a Grand Forks jail, claimed that he was not involved in Drew's disappearance and refused to speak to law enforcement officials or provide information as to her whereabouts despite the evidence against him. During a brief bond hearing several days earlier, bail for Rodriguez's release was set at a staggering $5 million. While he remained silent in custody, the search for Drew continued unabated and focused around these 3 towns. The work of the searchers was made more difficult by the snow that covered the area abundantly. In an unprecedented move, the governors of North Dakota and Minnesota pledged during a December 9th press conference to aid in the search for Drew by employing several hundred members of the National Guard and other state employees. North Dakota Governor John Hoeven said that Drew's disappearance was something that has touched every North Dakotan. Minnesota Governor Tim Pawlenty told reporters that he was very proud of the cooperation and the collaboration that's been exhibited by members of the community and police officials. Despite all the efforts made, there were no results. And due to worsening weather conditions, the authorities decided to suspend the search operation. In spring, the intensive search continued. Those searching for Drew hoped they would be able to find her as the winter snow had just begun to melt. After 5 long months of searching, they were eager to return Drew home. Finally, on April 17, 2004, Drew's body was found. It lay in a field in Crookston, just a few miles from the bridge under which the boot had been found. Drew's family was overwhelmed with grief upon hearing of the heart-wrenching discovery. Her father told reporters, "We were waiting for that call, and when that call came, we all stopped living for a second. It was her parents' worst nightmare and one that would haunt them for the rest of their lives." The field where the body was found had already been searched, but apparently because of the large drifts, they could not find it immediately. Drew was naked below the waist, which made the motive of the crime obvious. Her hands were tied behind her back, and there was a rope around her neck and a cut. Under the rope were the remnants of a plastic bag, indicating that the bag had first been put over Drew's head and then tied around her neck with a rope. Hair matching Rodriguez's DNA was found on Drew's jacket. Before she died, the young woman had been brutally beaten and stabbed repeatedly. The medical examiner listed 3 possible causes of her death. It was either the cut on her neck, suffocation, or the third possible cause, which was hypothermia. On April 24, 2004, after many months without a word, Drew's family was able to say goodbye to her. About 1,500 people attended the mourning ceremony. North Dakota, where Drew was kidnapped, abolished the death penalty back in 1975. Minnesota, where the body was found, did not use the death penalty as a punishment either. However, because Drew had been transported across state lines, the crime was considered a federal crime, and therefore the prosecutor's office had the right to seek the death penalty for Rodriguez. On August 30, 2006, Alfonso Rodriguez Jr. was convicted in the Drew Shoden case. The jury recommended that he be sentenced to death. On February 8, 2007, Judge Ralph Erickson, during the hearing, told the unconfessing Rodriguez that his senseless and violent actions caused the jury in the court to make a difficult decision. Alfonso Rodriguez Jr. became the first person sentenced to death in the state of North Dakota in nearly a century. After 6 years on death row, on June 28, 2013, Rodriguez confessed that he was the one who kidnapped and took Drew's life. However, the story doesn't end there. Ralph Erickson, who had previously been the district judge who sentenced Rodriguez to death, became a U.S. Court of Appeals judge, and it was he who in 2021 overturned his own conviction of Rodriguez and ordered a new sentencing phase. Rodriguez's guilt is not in doubt, and has been confirmed by various types of DNA testing. In this case, it is the death penalty that is at issue. Erickson overturned the death sentence, citing, among other things, the failure of defense attorneys to properly examine Rodriguez's mental health and the testimony of forensic expert Michael McGee, which the judge himself said misled him. This is the expert's testimony, which stated at the time that Rodriguez violated Drew's sexual integrity within 24 to 36 hours of the abduction. The fact is that there was no direct evidence to support this, such as Rodriguez's seminal fluid on Drew's body. According to the judge, the expert gave his opinion, but it was not supported by the facts, which misled the judge and influenced his verdict. Still, in reversing the death sentence, Erickson noted that even without the presence of Rodriguez's seminal fluid, the circumstances in which Drew's body was found, naked below the waist with her hands tied behind her back, were indicative of a sexually motivated crime. Judge Erickson said that the failure to examine Rodriguez's mental health, both generally and at the time of his crime, was a violation of his constitutional rights. After Rodriguez's death sentence was overturned, the federal prosecutor's office issued a statement saying they would seek the death penalty for him again. However, 2 years later, in 2023, the prosecutors abandoned those plans and accepted that Alfonso Rodriguez's death sentence was commuted to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. A statement to that effect was issued, which said, "The United States of America by Max Schneider, United States Attorney for the District of North Dakota, hereby withdraws the notice of intent to seek a sentence of death against defendant Alfonso Rodriguez Jr." Filed on October 28, 2004, Schneider wrote in a March 14 court filing, "The United States no longer intends to seek the death penalty in this case. My thoughts today are with Drew Shoden's family, particularly her parents, Linda Walker and Alan Shoden," said Schneider. "They are genuinely good people and loving parents who, in the wake of an unimaginable loss, have worked closely with our office for nearly 20 years. We continue to wish them the greatest measure of peace possible. I also want to commend the trial team, including former United States Attorney Drew Wrigley, as well as our office's appellate attorneys and support staff. Over the last 2 decades, they have continuously upheld the high standards of the Department of Justice through their work on this tragic case. As a result of their efforts, Mr. Rodriguez is and will remain a convicted murderer. The directive to withdraw the death notice has changed how the United States Attorney's Office will proceed with this case. What will not change is that Mr. Rodriguez will draw his last breath in a federal prison. This case led to changes in sex offender registration laws. On July 27, 2006, President George Bush signed the Adam Walsh Child Protection and Safety Act, which included Drew's Law. Drew's Law changed the name of the National Sex Offender Public Registry to the Drew Shoden National Sex Offender Public Website, which provides information to the public on the whereabouts of registered sex offenders, regardless of state, territory, or tribal boundaries. On June 22, 2013, news broke that Alfonso Rodriguez had been transferred from death row prison in Terre Haute, Indiana to Coleman II, a high-security penitentiary in Sumterville, Florida. This is where it looks like he will spend his last days. A 19-year-old girl, Linda, didn't show up for breakfast and then lunch one day. When they sent her brother Howard to check up on her, he saw something that would scar him for life. Why did Linda not come home for breakfast? Did she oversleep? What did Howard see? We are going to reveal a case which was buried under a thick layer of snow about half a century ago. The snow has now finally melted and the killer is now behind bars. Come with us as we look at what exactly happened on the fateful day of a cold February back in 1978. February is the month when Buffalo, New York's second largest city, gets the highest amount of snowfall, and this is where our case today takes us. It is located at the head of the Niagara River across the Canadian border from southern Ontario. Linda Tashari was a bartending student living alone in the family cottage, a little behind the larger home where the rest of her family resided. Even though she lived alone at the guest house, she was always in contact with everyone. Well, she only lived about 5 minutes away. As Howard, her brother, described her, she was the one who the family members talked to if they had problems. She liked to keep the family together. It was the 8th of February, 1978. It was past noon. Her lunch was cold, and when Linda's brother went over to the cottage to fetch her, the doors were invitingly open. When he entered the cottage, he was greeted by a scene so horrifying that it would scar him forever, or at least for 44 years. The house was warm, and no one dared open a window. Buffalo was in the grips of a blizzard, and there was no one outside. The streets were empty, and everything was covered in a blanket of snow. It was 8 in the morning on the 8th of February, 1978. Linda's family, her mom and her brother, saw someone walking away from the cottage behind their home and getting into a green Chevrolet Nova parked across the street from their house. He was a man who was about 5 feet 10 inches tall, had a medium build, wearing a ski cap and a navy blue coat. Howard Tashari, Linda's brother, assumed the person was Linda's boyfriend. Who else could it be? He must have stayed the night and just had to get home early. The day went rather normally, but it seemed like Linda had overslept. She wasn't there for breakfast. It was lunchtime when Linda's mother sent Howard, who was 18 at the time, to wake her up. Linda would normally come to the main house to check her mail, but she hadn't that day, which concerned her mother. She sent Howard to check up on her, and when he went to the cottage, he found the side door was unlocked. He pushed the door as it creaked open. The sound of the radio was the first thing he noticed as he stepped inside. As he made his way towards the hallway, he spotted blood stains on the floor. He knew something was dreadfully wrong as he went deeper into the room. He was horrified to find his sister in her pajamas lying lifeless, staring at him in a pool of blood on the living room floor next to the doorway to her bedroom. Howard, trembling as he stuttered her name, knelt beside her as her ice-cold body stared at him. He was frozen for a moment with a million thoughts running through his mind. How could he break this news to his mother? But he had to. He went back and explained what he saw. They called the police. They knew it was the stranger, but he had been too far away for them to identify the man. In the hours after Linda was found fatally stabbed, the Buffalo police detectives began their investigation and gathered evidence from the crime scene. At the time, the area was covered in snow. The police officers who arrived at the crime scene found a trail of blood leading away from the cottage. This led investigators to believe that the killer had injured himself somehow. With limited resources, they had very little to work with. The Buffalo Police Department notified local hospitals and medical stores in the hopes that the killer would seek medical attention to tend to his wounds. The entire cottage was filled with DNA evidence, with the killer's blood splattered on several rooms and on several items, including a Grand Funk Railroad vinyl record cover. Linda has been stabbed 13 times and had wounds on her face, neck and back. Linda has bruises on her face, abdomen and arm which were sustained at the time of the murder. The autopsy revealed that Linda died of blood loss. The police worked through the usual suspects, speaking to Linda's boyfriend, her stepfather, and the handyman, but nothing came up, and soon they were out of clues and no arrests were made. The motive of the murder was ruled to likely be a robbery gone wrong. The killer had seen the cottage away from the main home. This attracted him, but when he entered the cottage, he saw a 19-year-old sleeping there. Wanting to steal things, He moved around the cottage looking for precious items to take. But it all failed when Linda woke up, and in the commotion he had no other option but to kill the witness. But the question remained. Who was the mystery man who was leaving the cottage that morning? Who was the man in that navy blue coat who got into a green Chevrolet Nova? With no other leads, the case went cold. All of the evidence collected in the case, including the DNA evidence, was eventually packaged in 39 envelopes and bags stacked into boxes put away in storage about 2 months after the crime. Even though the killer had fled the crime scene, he had left his DNA. Back in the 1980s, DNA analysis did not exist. It was determined that the blood found at the crime scene was a different blood type from that of Linda. The cold case squad began looking into the case again in 2006, and the detectives sent about 40 pieces of evidence to Erie County Central Police Service's forensic laboratory for analysis. The Tisharis knew the DNA evidence was the key to the killer, but the technology wasn't advanced enough to decipher it back then. But when the technology was upgraded in April 2016, the family members contacted a homicide detective who was on the cold case squad, seeking help. The detective tracked down 14 other men whose names were in the original case file, as well as others who might have known Linda around the time she was killed. These were Linda's stepfather, a couple of men who lived in the neighborhood at the time, and an old boyfriend. There was also a man who helped Linda's sister move. All of them willingly submitted their DNA profile, and they were all ruled out as the killer by the detectives. The team began developing DNA profiles with the blood collected from the crime scene. But the DNA wasn't complete, and so they could only create a partial DNA profile. There were parts of genetic information missing, making it complicated. A partial DNA profile is a profile made from a sample, which is considered to be partial and does not have enough genetic materials available to sample. The sample could have degraded over time, and the information might not be as accurate as they want it to be. That was exactly the reason why these 2 DNA samples from the crime scene were not allowed to be uploaded to the National DNA Database. But the rules and the standards changed 3 years later in 2019. The lab staff uploaded all the DNA data they had in their possession, including the ones from the crime scene. And the next day, they had the face of the killer. The National DNA Database had a match, and it came from Oregon. They finally had a name: John Soberin. This felt too good to be true, and so they cross-checked him with the original case file, but his name did not appear anywhere. Soberin had to have lived in the area in Buffalo at the time of the homicide. They went through the file again, and from the testimony given by Linda's mother and brother, they found that the suspect had driven a green Chevrolet Nova. That was enough for them to zero in on the suspect. The detectives asked for the records from the Department of Motor Vehicles to see people who owned the described vehicle. And even if they did not find John Soberin, they did find people who were connected to Soberin. The first address was to a woman with whom Soberin had a child, and the second one was registered to Soberin's adoptive mother in Tonawanda. It was enough for the detectives to determine that Soberin lived around the area at the time of the murder. The records also showed that he had lived in many other states since the 1980s, including Florida, Georgia, South Carolina, Arizona, Colorado, Washington, Oregon, and Ohio, which earned him the name the Drifter. When the investigators took Soberin in for something that happened in the 1970s, he immediately asked for a lawyer. At the arrest, the county forensic lab performed additional DNA analysis on the original crime scene evidence, which included the bloodstains on the sleeves of the Grand Funk Railroad album. And the analysis report was consistent with Soberin's DNA. Back in the 70s, Soberin was nicknamed Chief the Thief. He was known to steal bicycles. He also has been arrested in relation to an incident involving property damage. He had been charged with robbery. There were a lot of coincidences that fit in perfectly. It was very likely that he was the man the Tishari saw walking away from the cottage that morning. He also had a green Chevrolet Nova. The crime scene looked like a robbery gone wrong. He took pride in his stealing ventures. In the case of Linda, could be one of the unfortunate ones where he broke into the cottage, but unexpectedly there was somebody inside. And to eliminate the witness, he took the drastic step of becoming a murderer. On the 11th of October this year, the jury found Soberin guilty of second-degree murder, and the prosecution and the defense both agreed that the victim and the murderer did not know each other. Sobran faces a maximum of 25 years to life as he awaits sentencing on the 13th of December. Do you think if they had stopped the man walking away that they would have at least known what had happened in the cottage? Maybe he would have tried to escape and it would still have taken 4 decades for them to find justice. Maybe they could have got to Linda sooner and saved her. But at least now, all these years later, the family has closure on what happened. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the depths of unsolved mysteries. Cold cases not only challenge our understanding of the past, but also ignite our curiosity and determination for answers. Remember to subscribe to stay updated on our latest investigations. And if you have any information regarding the cases we've covered, don't hesitate to reach out. Together, we can shed light on the shadows of the past and bring closure to those who seek it. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay curious, and never stop seeking the truth.